Yeah, well, I was born in Summerhill Terrace. It's about 25 houses there. And it's, you'd often hear people refer to it as one of those mean streets off of the river. There was, there'd be dockers and fellas that'd be doing casual work around the area, and lads that'd be over working on the railway, which was close by, in the road freight, but also on the trains and that. So you had the Erden Foundry nearby, and you had a whole host of other industries. Strangman's Brewery. You had the ESB depot just up behind us in Rockfield Park area. And you had small engineering works over where the Fanning House was there in the Glen. And a whole plethora of abattoirs around, say, Denny's Lane, it was known, and also you had Denny's factory on Morgan Street. And then you had Ballybrick, you had, of course, the docks, and the Ford Wharf was on the south side of the river, and the North Quay. So the whole area was really busy. You had Murphy's Engineering in Mary Street. Keneally's used to process Indian corn there, and Irish Agriculture Wholesale had depots all around there. As you mentioned, I think Willie Watt had two factories in the area, one on Grattan Quay and one in Ann Street. And you had Samuel Morris's coal yard on Bridge Street. CIE used to look after their horses. They stabled their kind of big dray horses that in those days, I'm talking about now, the 50s, used to bring around goods from the road freight on these flatback trailer with a fella sitting there with a CIE hat on him and the big dray horses, So that was the type of area. But I was born in 1949 and grew up on that street. So there's some great neighbours there. Wasn't much.
And just on the street then, were they council houses or were they rented houses?
Yeah, no, they were council houses. In fact, they were the second group of council houses. The councils only start building affordable and social housing, which is a term we use all the time now, in the, as far as I can recall, in the late 1880s. And so whatever, Summerhill Terrace was the second lot of houses. The first lot of these social houses was built in Green Street. And there's a plaque down on the wall if you go into Summerhill Terrace and see, and the name of the mayor and all that. His name escapes me now. But they were the second batch of houses. Now, they were very basic, I must say.
And there's lovely photographs in the pool collection of Summerhill Terrace, those houses. With loads of kids outside the houses.
That's right. There's all steps up a hill. There was a flat part along over to the top of Dyehouse Lane, and which went down onto Mary Street. And
Dyehouse Lane, was there a butcher or tannery there or something there?
I think they did process hides and the dyeing of hides and that. Now you associate that more with Port Law sort of, and you'd see it in third world countries where they have these big vats and stuff in there. It's an awful process, and the whiff of it and stuff. But I don't remember, that must have been gone at that, but that was why it was called that. Who built the place there on it, must be 50 years ago now, was Ollie Dempsey. So Dyehouse Gallery and that. That was a former hotel called the Central Hotel. And I remember people gathered in there in the summer when
there was a hotel?
Yeah, there was a little hotel. There was the Portrait Guest House was a kind of, it's a guest house now, but it was kind of a mini hotel. Yeah, on Mary Street you had three hotels. The Central Hotel is where Ollie Dempsey's place is. And you had the Metropole Hotel. Well, I meant to say there was a number of hotels as well, Breen's the Bridge Hotel, in that area when we're talking about the locale. And, there's lovely photographs of the street, and there's a kind of a high path, like that high path in Cannon Street, step. You see, people, obviously, contraception was unknown in those days, so people had families like steps of stairs. But they were also considered, I think, reflecting on it, looking back and talking with people, children were an asset because there was no kind of, there wasn't any long-term view of education, proper education. The thing was to try and, if you reach 14 or 15, get out and kind of work, or get an apprenticeship, which would be the best. Because secondary school was a no-no. Then you had to, it's only the wealthy could afford to go on after primary.
So secondary was private, right?
Yeah, there was private schools, for kids of the wealthy, you know, and the new leadership that was going to emerge out, you know, that was the way it was. And the Christian Brothers provided basic education, which read, write, and that, because, you know, even though technology was relatively primitive compared with now, a minimum standard of some sort of education. Now, not everyone reached that because you could drop out, and obviously, I won't go into now, but the situation in schools was kind of relatively horrendous with the kind of attitude of Christian brothers and nuns. In my experience, I went to Mount Sinai, but that street, yeah, in the summer it was good on that street.
Just back to the Metropole Hotel. Did you ever hear of the Powers that owned the Metropole? Because they were now they're probably gone before your time, but maybe you heard anything about, but they were associated with a lot of Republican activities back during the Revolutionary time. That they were like it was like the headquarters for messages coming in and out of Waterford from Dublin and stuff like that.
No, I think I heard of the Power family, but I didn't know much about it. Other than that, there was the Edwards. There was a few Republicans around in Summerhill Terrace, and they used to come down over. My mother used to tell us these stories. They'd come down over the wall of, you know, where the ESB, and we call it the Plots area, where Rockfield Park is now. You can come in over. Suppose you came in from the back of Cody's Hill and Knockhouse, and that you could come down over the, you know, where the pylons are now. And some fellas on the run and that sort of stuff, and they come down over the walls there, and there was often raids. You know, my mother would tell us about something, the RIC and some soldiers would go up and try and raid. So I think so there must have been some element of maybe safe houses or whatever, or that. But I don't, to be honest, I don't remember much about the that family or that being a sort of a base. But I do remember it was kind of a nice little hotel and a little bit down at heel, as hotels nearly always were in those days. It wasn't posh, but it had the basic stuff. It had a little barn, it had rooms, and if ever there was an emergency, and often they would be, if you had to call the services, you'd have to go down there, and in the hallway there's one of those phones where you put in something and wind it up, and someone, you know, if you rang 999 or whatever its equivalent was there, you know. So that was.
As people didn't have phones, I suppose.
Oh no, they were a no-no in terms of, you know, the wealthy, presumably, this was now the 50s, the wealthy would have had phones, and everyone would have known a family that, or known who would have phones. Some people in Rockfield Park would have had phones, because that was a private estate, and the man that used to run the dispensary, a man called Power, talking about Powers again, he lived up there, you know, and he was he was a fella that, and he thought he owned the dispensary in terms of dispensing, but people that had no access to, couldn't pay for doctors could wind up there, you know. And in those days, boils and ringworm and all that because of lack of diet. And Tucker Power was the nickname of the fella, you know. Which is after.
Where was the dispensary?
Dispensary was down where City Square is now on, you know, I think that's called Bakehouse Lane. Is that little lane that goes across by the library? Yeah. Just there. It was on Peter Street. That's the street it was on. The dispensary. But Tucker Power was the man that seemed to run that, and there was runners around, and just distempered walls, primitive going in there, and you were left in no uncertain terms about your status in life when you had to go into. There was a few forums along the way, you know. And
I'll come back to that in a second. Just go back to your own parents. Like, where were they from, and what did they work at? Or, I mean, what was it?
Well, yeah, my dad was in the army, and his family. I don't know much about him because they were originally in the when my dad died. His certificate had to be got in a place called Somerset House in London, you know, and so you'd hear stories about them. They were in the British Army and they got sent here and there, and they were in a crowd called the Connaught Rangers. I don't know whether you ever heard. They mutinied in India because of when they got word and hearing what was happening here in Ireland, and they were out shooting the poor. You know, I mean, the British imperial legacy in India is absolutely horrendous. You know, yeah, it's really horrendous, and you know the massacres that they undertook. But anyway, the Connaught Rangers revolted, and they got sent back to Ireland, and I think that there was some shot actually in India, from what I can get, but they stayed in the military, and my dad ended up then. This was his father would have came back, as I understood it. But I honestly don't know much about this period because my dad died young. I was only 14, you know, and he.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I have vague kind of memories of him, you know, because in those days, we were trying to get a bit of work, and fellas used to hang around the pub after and that sort of stuff, drinking. Maybe it was just to, there was so much kind of deprivation. The pub was solace. It's like, it's like I was down in Bunman there recently talking to some of the people in the Heritage Centre about the mines. There was a massive drinking problem 150 years ago. Because the poor people that lived in the shanty town on the beach there, just behind the beach, used to kind of, it was the only way they could, it was a brutal, short kind of life, and drinking was an escape. So that was the way, and a lot of the dock around Summerhill Terrace and Bridge Street and all that, you'd see all the lads hanging around if a ship, before a ship came in. I'll go into that in a minute if you want. But look, my dad then, during the emergency, which was the Second World War, he was in Athlone. That's where there's some more Cloono more than there in Waterford in Athlone. Now we've lost touch with him a long time. I didn't even know any of him. He got sent down to Waterford and posted in the military barracks here, actually on this site, and that's where he met my mother and kind of stayed in Waterford then, and so. And on that street, then there was, that was the scenario there. You got work where you took work where you found it, and there was some large family. We had 5 in the family, I think. But there was families with 14 and 15 on the street in those small houses and that. So you can imagine the scenario. But there were great families, and everyone kind of stuck together. People grew a bit of veg in the back, or kept chickens, all that sort of stuff, and there was one family had, they kept pigs. The Lundgren's, famous, well-known family, they ended up, the Lundgren brothers, they ended up owning a bakery down in Bridge Street after Lundgren's Bakery, on the site of the original Jacob's biscuit factory. But they were great characters, John, Joe, Eddie, Billy, Little Mo, they had nicknames and all that, and the woman was, Mrs. Lundgren was a great, cause she was one of those kind of people that would knock a living out of anything, So there was the Roaches, the man, we assumed the best blahs in Waterford were made by Roach's Bakery on the Glen there, just down from Ballybrick. And Colm Roach was the chief baker, and they were living in number 2 somewhere there. And the blahs, people queuing up for blahs early in the morning. There were balls of flour, that's what they used to say, with a big lump of country butter on. There was eating and drinking in them, as the older people used to say. But that was the scenario, that was the situation in Summerhill Terrace, the type of families. And there was a number of families. There was one family, the Murphys, some of the lads were in the circus. Yeah, they used to travel around, kind of, presumably Ireland, but maybe England as well. And sometimes, they'd have stuff to do with the circus, tables for elephants standing on, and all that sort of stuff. These sort of characters. So,
what did they do in the circus?
I'm not sure what they done, because they moved out sort of and moved on somewhere else. Yeah, they were called the Beck Murphys. A lot of people had nicknames, and there was other Murphys there as well, And then there was butlers. A lot of the people would have worked in the cellar, which is Denny's, is known as a cellar. I'm sure you heard it. And so, as I said, some people getting work around the docks, and some of my family worked in road freight, uncles and that sort of stuff, in the CIE road freight, which was the depot in Sally Park. So, the picture I'm pointing out is that it was a hugely busy place, and it was a centre of kind of activity and commercial activity, and there was jobs there, and so you had that allied to the docks. and then it was adjacent to O'Connell Street, where O'Connell Street, George Street, the cultural quarter now. And there was lots of stuff going on there in terms of.
So where did your dad work then after you came back to work?
He worked in different jobs, but he worked in Shaw's kind of as a porter there. Shaw's. If you can imagine in the 50s, there was Shaw's and Herdens. They were big department stores. These called them the old type department. You can still see the names of the people that had it before Shaw's. I think something Fielding.
Robertson.
Right, yeah, that's it, Robertson. Yeah, you can still see that, and it's lovely to actually see that. The old sort of got exposed, and they kept that sign. But that was a huge department store, and there was goods coming in all the time, and they had to be stored up in lofts and brought down. And it was always busy. In my memory, I often happened to go down to collect them or collect a few bob for the mother, because he'd be going to the pub instead of going home. That's what they used. That's what people used to do. And there was pubs in Gladstone Street at the time. There was pubs all across O'Connell Street. It was near the Summerhill Terrace area. There must have been about 13 or 14 pubs. I probably could name about a dozen of them. Close by, on Bridge Street alone. In the Bridge Street area, you would have 4 or 5 pubs, sort of, and over as far as say Thomas Street. Along the quay you mentioned Lundigan's earlier on, but you had, on the Bilberry side, you had, what was it called? Sinnett's pub. And then the Bridge Hotel had a pub, John Joe Breen's pub. Breen's was known as. And just down from that was Morris Lundigan's. And further down where Maud Donnelly had a pub later on, there was a pub. And then further on where the corner bar used to be. I forget the names of it. But then you go up the street, Harney's was there, which was the Blue Haven. We might talk about that later on, because you might remember the Blues Club up, Pete Kelly from Morrison Road playing they were Docker's sons that used to get music. We can talk about that. And then up to Johnny the Bromheads. And you had the Hole in the Wall on Ann Street, which was close enough to Summerhill Terrace. And then you had 3 or 4 pubs in the Glen alone in that triangle. You had Hanley's pub, and you had, where Paddy Fleming's, and the people before that is the only people that I remember there. Crackies was called. Krakinski was the owner. They were Poles. I always thought they were Hungarians, but there was a bit of chat online there a couple of months ago, and the woman said, "Oh no, I thought they were Hungarian because the information we had was that they had fled in 1956, the Hungarian Revolution, when the Russians invaded, sort of, and a lot of people were displaced. But they came over and but it turned out this lady said, "Oh, I'm delighted to hear my family are mentioned," because it was a very good house, and music and singing, and dockers would have rolls of notes at a choke of horse when they finish a ship, So if you fell into their company, you'd get a few points, if you got your entrance fee, as people used to say in those days. You can imagine, money was tight. So if there was a big coal boat and it was going to finish, early in the afternoon, and if you were down, and fellas used to stand, they used to call it point duty around the Bridge Hotel and the Dominican church on the corners there. Maybe after Mass, even fellas would be waiting to get a capture, they used to call it. Did you ever hear that term? Yeah, if you got a capture, it's all. If you had your entrance fee, which is the money to get a point or two, and what was it, 10 old pence for a large bottle, the large Guinness. So you could be in luck, depending on, and a lot of the fellas were generous, sort of, and, knew the story. So Cracky's pub was music and singing and what have you. Paddy Fleming took it over, famous for darts after. And you had the Glen Bar, then was where the showboat is.
And the Glen had an interesting reputation as one stage.
It had what?
An interesting reputation.
It had, yeah. Yeah, well, look, all those pubs that I mentioned, and the quay was full of. The quay was. It was an exciting place in a way and colourful. You know what I mean? And my memory mostly is from, the early '60s of it, because as a youngster up to 10, you're kind of you're messing about and kind of, you're not taking as much notice, you take more notice. But there was always exotic seafarers around, sort of, and there'd be ships tied up on the Ford Wharf, just across the road from the Bridge Hotel there now. from Morris Lundigan's pub. And on the north side there'd be a line of ships, and down further in the Clyde you'd have ships there. So seafarers kind of often mingle, and they might they might see a ship with the, it might have been a company they worked for in the past, you'd see the livery on the funnels in those days of the company. So you might call up and see were any of your mates still on the ship or whatever. And so they'd all mix in that. Now, when whiskey and all that, sometimes they could be fisticuffs. They were often, I'd say, over women. All that. The ladies of the night used to walk around there and all that, and
that was normal, wasn't it?
That was kind of, from memory, that was kind of normal there, and they plied their trade sort of there, and then there was a certain cohort that were like, I get the impression, I think in talking to people subsequently, the officer class are kind of people that would have a bit of authority on ships, maybe an old stripe or two. They went for these women they were Twiggy lookalikes. Did you ever hear of Twiggy? Jane Shrimpton. Young people won't remember these, but these were the first kind of supermodels. And there were actually women in town that looked like, I won't name any names now for obvious reasons, litigation might follow, but and so the officers, and they might move off out of those pubs and they began to frequent places like the Stronghold and the early Maryland. They were more kind of a little bit upmarket, if you know what I mean. But the other people then, sometimes the women would go back onto the ships, and in those days, compared with now, I mean, seafaring was completely different. For one thing, if you went, that saying, "I join the merchant navy and see the world." You could see the world because a ship would take, maybe 3,000 ton of coal, take 4 or 5 days sometimes. Because cargo handling methods were different. They weren't as big mechanised, and dockers would have to shovel stuff. So you can imagine, and so a ship, so you could walk around town and kind of, you could meet people in the local pubs, and stroll around in the day and have a bit of bonhomie during the night, and all that sort of stuff. But that's all gone, of course, now. It's just in and out.
So there's no question about passports or anything?
No, there was no gate. You can't walk into docks anywhere now, really. There's gates, and you have to have passports, and there's immigration and security, and seafarers, compared with in those days, as I said, well, and some of them, of course, might miss their ships. One of the things living in that area is where you'd hear these sardines going, ships moving on the river because it was busy. They always have to signal anyway, that ship, you had the kind of ship's route. But they'd be calling out for fellas that'd be late and all that sort of stuff. And some people would miss their vessels, and a few seafarers stayed. Like I knew some of them after myself and worked with them in various things after, German lads and different things, stayed in Waterford. And that tended to happen because if you spend a life at sea, you don't put down any roots, but you can't go on forever, and then you have to, the job gets, and you get retired, and you're stranded. So often, fellas might say, look, I have enough of that bloody stuff, and there's, I suppose in the 50s was the best time to be at sea, but the romance of the sea sort of, you could say there was something romantic maybe in those days, but I'm not so much now. Ships are in and out. You see them coming up the river all the time to Bellevue, and they're gone the next morning. And the smaller crews because of technology.
Were you ever tempted yourself to go to sea?
I didn't in the end. Various things. I kind of I went out to work relatively early at 15 and that sort of stuff. I got so 15 would be the type of age you go as a cabin boy and all that sort of. And you could go because if you went to, you could walk into the stevedore's office and ask them to put down your name on a list, like, if they were short a cabin boy or if some, they could go. So one or two people that I knew went to sea only for a short while and that sort of stuff. But if you live in a port city, you would be kind of inclined to, especially you're not capable of analysing the realities of the situation, but you see all these fellas having a good time and the crack in pubs and all this sort of stuff, and the exotic, and you're taking on more warm climes and all that sort of stuff. And if you're from along the river, you utilise the resource that it is in terms of messing about swimming in it and boating on it and all that sort of stuff. And to this day, I love port cities. Normally when we travel now, we make sure that we're spending a bit of time in port cities, because there is a difference in my view. I always think they are anyway.
And what is that, John? Because that's kind of interesting, because I always think that even though Waterford was quite a small city, it had that kind of feel of, like part of the world, wasn't it? Like it's like
well, it was connected. The sea connects, and if there's trading going on over generations and generations, millennia, not, but over long periods of time, a kind of a certain attitude emerges. There's an internationalism, and there's no doubt about it. That was here. Even Waterford is a small port, relatively small port, but we've had shipping sort of going way back. Our history is about the Vikings coming up. When they come around the south of Ireland, this big gaping harbour. The hook lighters on one side, Crook on the other, and you'd know that that's an issue for shelter for one thing, but it could take you into the interior where the riches would be that you want to plunder or rob. But the Brits, when they came around from the Royal Ports in Southampton, and a lot of the invasions would have been true. Or Cromwell, the saying Cromwell said when the saying by hook or by crook. Cromwell apparently that saying goes back to Cromwell. I'll take Ireland either by hook or by crook, because they used to get a bit of resistance, but the resistance they got would be no match. They were much more advanced in terms of military capacity and history and experience, whether it was the Brits or Vikings or whatever. But so there is that vibe in port cities, I must say, and you take the difference between Madrid and Barcelona, say, for one thing, or anywhere you go, any other country you want to name, say Ankara and Istanbul. Now, Istanbul is a sensation. There's 3 waterways in Istanbul, one big city straddling 2 continents, Asia and Europe. But the point I'm making, that there is, and you're right, there is this international, and I mentioned earlier on about the Blue Haven. That blues club in the early 60s, Peter Kelly and the lads will tell you this, you get LPs from New Orleans, and you get, the big ships coming with animal feed or whatever from the Galveston, the Gulf of Mexico, New Orleans, and they'd have blues and jazz sort of stuff, and they might be looking for a bit of trad, and the lads would actually, because that's the thing with shipping, if you're working on the docks and that. Remember earlier on I mentioned that the seafarers wanted local currency, or they'd be out in the pubs, you'd have to get local currency, so they'd always be trading, they'd stock up before whatever port they'd leave, stock up with beer, whiskey, anything, clothing, boots. I don't know whether you remember the monkey boots in those years, the lovely Forerunners, Doc Martens, but they were smashed, they were made in Czechoslovakia, coming on Polish boats mostly. But they want to sell the goods and that. So, and when you're working on a ship, discharge and all that, you get to know some of the crew and talk. And the deck officer were always compared with the the lads that would work below deck and deck hands and that sort of. The deck officer had to have a certain amount of education, so they'd have they might have some literature, and they'd have LPs were the thing in those days, books, and they'd be interested in music. They might have done elementary music sort of at school and that sort of stuff. So they'd get talking to local lads, and they were interested. That was the thing. There was obviously a language barrier, but seafarers pick up different bits and they can communicate. So if you're interested in music, and someone would play music, because sometimes in the summer, an old little box of beer would be opened up, and on the aft of a ship, and someone might play an old squeeze box, or them smaller ones, the mandolins, or whatever, and a few of the dockers might give a few blasts. Because normally at the end of a ship as well, the tradition was you get beers for the dockers, and there'd be a bottle of whiskey as well, sort of, and you might share that out. And the dockers used to always say, "Oh no, it's tradition for luck, so that the ship, so they're very strict." But I think it happened in every port. But yeah, how did we get onto that? The point about
just one more thing about that, though, John, because it was also like it's called contraband now, right?
Yeah.
But it's not really. I mean, it was, as you say, it was normal. If someone was working on the ship, they wanted to get cash locally, they exchanged something like a bottle of whiskey for a few bob or whatever. But there was also drugs involved as well in Waterford. Like, I mean, I'm talking about soft drugs. Like in history as well, that there was always things around Waterford that you wouldn't get, say, if you lived in Athlone or if you lived in Galway. You wouldn't get it in Galway, but you get it in Waterford.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. Yeah, look, there was that trade contraband, but if you're a customs man, a ship leaving one port that takes on stuff, the ship shannery, they're the people that provision the ship, and any goods, the deck officer gives the ship shannery a list of what they need, but they have to get locked in a bond. What they call a bond is a bonded stores or on base, and it gets there's a kind of a, what do they call those things where you kind of put a bit of wire on and you stand. Yeah, I forget the name on it. A seal. A seal, yeah. But what the seafarers would do is they'd say to the ship shanner, he'd come in for a list first, and he'd have to go off, and it might be at the end of the day or 2 days, he'd come over with a big van or whatever it was. Like the most famous ship shannery in Waterford is Tosh Widger, the Widgers, because they do all the meat and that sort of stuff. And but they can also get any other good from the cash and carry that was needed. So the ratings on the ship are the ordinary 5/8s or ABs or whatever compared with the officers. They'd always say, we'll take some of this and that, and that would be sold to them separately, and they'd store it in their cabins or hide it away in these Samson posts. These are big posts that ships' cranes they're needed for. In those days, there wasn't unitized loads, so most ships had kind of, there was all block and tackle, ropes and all that sort of stuff. It was horrendous, really. But the lads would hide these and down in the bowels of the ship in the engine room and all that sort of stuff. But I think, my experience, the customs people would cut a certain amount of slack in that. But if there was acres of stuff, and sometimes you might get the odd docker who have a long list of stuff. And so, you'd be going out with bags of stuff. And cigarettes was the key thing, as well as whiskey and plenty of beer, crates of beer, I'm talking about, cardboard boxes with bottles and cans of it, and the whiskey. But that was one of the ways. But also there was fellas working on the river, around the river with the harbour board and all that, and kind of involved in other sort of stuff, fishing for it. They'd go out when the ship would be at lay-by in Dunmore East down the harbour. They might be waiting for a berth in town, These fellas used to go out and get a lot of stuff. Think of all the lads in Passage and Cheek Point and what, after I cut that, but anyway, what I'm saying? Yeah. And that kind of stuff and would go on. But if someone got too avaricious, as they say in Waterford, about, and a van load of stuff was being loaded up, and I've seen, yeah, and I knew people that the customs men had pounced on them, and the car had been pounded and all the stuff in the boot, So that's in the last 20 years now I'm talking about. But look, that was the way it was.
But you mentioned the Blue Haven, and do you know next to the Blue Haven there was a seaman's club. Could you tell us about that? Yeah.
Well, in every port city, there's kind of sometimes there are ex-seamen that kind of are involved. They're kind of charity, and sometimes they can be semi-religion. Other times they're not necessarily, And there was always seamen's missions in Waterford. There was a big one in Henrietta Street. Where the Dramatic Society had their club there? It's Galway's Cafe now, is it? Or a solicitor's office, just there in Henrietta Street. That was for a lot of early seafarers from over joined the Royal Navy, the Merchant Navy, and sometimes the Royal Navy itself. And, ships used to get repaired to them, and there was shipbuilding in over, I think even before Belfast, you know what I mean? And so that was a club. It was I think it was the Royal Seafarers kind of mission or something like that. There's an old photograph, you see them on the history site. And but this one over on O'Connell Street was, I think from memory, it was run by just people that wanted to look after their welfare, because seafarers, to this day, ordinary seafarers are paid lousy money. It's mostly third world, or the global south provide seafarers. Filipinos now. It's been really exposed what happened to them in the last year or two with the pandemic, because they can't go ashore, they can't fly back. The ships with no food on them, they don't get paid or anything like that, and they have to pay agents a fee to get a berth, and they get lousy wages, sort of, and that's why in Dunmore, even on the big liners, all the relatively wealthy people that when the liners would come into Dunmore, the poor Filipinos would be up under the Ocean Hotel because it was a hot spot, and they'd be trying to phone home and all that. Because they were denied up to recently, and maybe they still are in most companies, access to the internet on vessels. And they're down on the bows of ships. They're doing all the cleaning, laundry, looking after your cabin and all that, and kind of working in the kitchens, washing and cleaning, and sometimes prepping stuff with chefs and all that. But so back in the day with these, they still have them, by the way, in Belfast and Dublin, I think Cork as well, and Liverpool, all the big port cities would still have seamen. And the lads go there because you want to exercise you develop sea legs at sea. You want a bit of terra firma when you get, and there'd be a snooker table there, and there might be music, and they could also meet. There'd be women there, but they wouldn't be the women of the street, if you know what I mean. There was, and it was kind of like a Legion of Mary, but it wasn't. My experience was it wasn't the religious thing there, but it was a busy little place just next to the Blue Haven. There used to be a bicycle shop under it, and you went upstairs to this place. The Stella Maris Club was the name of it. Now that you're out to bring it back to me.
And John, you mentioned earlier on about swimming in the river. You just said it in passing. Could you tell us about that? Because you said that when you were kids, it was quite common. Was that right? Yeah,
it was. Yeah. Along Grattan Quay there, where Willie Watt had the factory, and
the distilleries.
We're near the distillery. Down, yeah. Do you know if you came down Dry House Lane, where Geraghty's tire place is now, that was where Willie Watt's factory was, on Grattan Quay. He had the other one in Ann Street. But across the road there was a thing called a hulk. There was hulks all the way down. That's what they were called in Waterford. But they were London pontoons. They were built specifically, originally I think, designed for the Thames for mooring, right up, miles long of river up into central London. And these were kind of tanks, or kind of buoyancy tanks, and you put a kind of a landing stage out onto them from the quays, and the ships could moor, and they'd have a certain draft of water at the end of it. So there was one of them opposite Willie Watt's place in Grattan Quay. There was another ship, we talk about him in the Cretefield, a concrete ship, an ammunition ship, that was used as a dock there, and ships used to discharge small colliers, coal boats. But we'd swim on the hulk, and in those days you could see 15, 16, 20 people swimming, diving off the bridge at high water, there. And we used to swim there, and there were steps as well down, swim over to the hulk, or walk out onto the hulk. And then, so I learned to swim down in the water side, just there at John's Bridge. There was an old jacks there that we used to, you'd undress in that jacks there. You could dive off the river at high water. Can you imagine swimming in that there? But it was fresh water. It was harder to swim because there was no salt. It's easier to swim in the sea with salt water, more buoyancy. So that's where I learned to swim, after having two near misses and falling into the river at the bridge, at the slip on the far side of the bridge from the Grattan Quay fellas used to fish there, Crowd, dozens of people fishing there for, you might get the odd bass and the odd trout, but mostly mullet now. Mullet is not a pleasant fish. You get eels there and fluke or flatfish. And but we were fishing there one day, and we had an old dog, a terrier, I think it was, or was it a cocker spaniel? Anyway, the leash fell into the water, and I stretched out too far, like, boom. And I still meet the man that saved me. Like, I was just going under the bridge for the last time, because you actually do go down once or twice, and you. But whatever, I just made it before I went under the bridge. It was only 7 or 8 at the time. I still remember as vivid. I made a quick swivel around, and Charlie Flynn, who had a proper rod, which was it was a salmon rod, which is a long kind of fishing rod. Because we used to, most people were so poor, like you made your own fishing rod. A bamboo came with them little oil, and you put a bit of catgut through and a hook onto the thing with a few worms that you had to collect in up in Bilberry or whatever. But Charlie Flynn, I know Charlie. He used to drink in Ali Max and that. He was a porter in Mount Sion there for years. I think he might be still there. I'd say you know him, but anyway, I still see him around in the library from time to time. He was in Ali Max one night. I got he said, "Oh yeah, give that man a point. He saved me life. He should have left you in the fucking river." Can you imagine? Yeah. Because there was a little corner there. They were all Fianna Fáil types, and you can cut that. But look, anyway, you know what I'm saying. But that I remember that. He'll tell you as well.
So he jumped in.
No, he just as I was going under the bridge. That was the end of me. Like if I'd gone, because once you went down under that, the concrete, the old.
You put down the rod, wasn't it?
Yeah, the old Rice Bridge. Now I'm talking, not the Rice Bridge. What was it called? Redmond Bridge. The old Redmond Bridge. Yeah, and if you went under, so. He just put down this thing, and I grabbed it, because you grab anything in those situations, and hauled me in. Yeah. And so it was a lucky escape. So I learned to swim after that, and then just to get back onto the swimming. So we used to swim around the Hulk on Grattan Quay. P.G. O'Shea, myself, Rémy Roach. There was a kind of a crew, and they were all from around the area. The Wilmots and all this sort of, and the Simpsons from Glasshouse Lane, and the Glen, and PJ was from Clashray Place, which is close enough near Morgan Street there. And but there was dozens of others that swim there, and we moved then up to Bilberry, and PJ kind of had PJ set up this kind of a club thing where he called it the Silverfin Swimming Club. And he wrote Silverfin. There was this little place up, when you come around the Bilberry Rock there after the current halting site. There was the brick factory was in there, and there was tunnels, and they had a little mini rail system going around there back in the day. It was derelict at the time, but the tunnel was there, so we'd undress there and just run across the road into the river and swim there. And that was the area now where the roly-polies were. There was kind of a grass verge. That area has been destroyed now with, that development, that Hanlon's place and all that. I won't go into what happened there because litigation would ensue. But the foreshore essentially, the foreshore. It's hard to get foreshore, but anyway, you see all the old concrete walls now and all that. There's no thought given to any aesthetics or anything there. It's horrendous. It's a pity that wasn't left, because now you could have brought the Greenway in there.
Well, it was always high tide.
Well. We'd always, the best time to swim and the most safest is at high water or when the tide would be on the turn. I'm not sure about the science of this, but for us and based on our experience, when a tide reaches high water, there's about a half an hour when it's very placid. It's like, it's kind of static almost. And so therefore you're not being pulled either way with the current. Although we got to know the currents, we could swim something. If you wanted to go to Point A, it's like you learn this when you're doing navigation at sea as well, sort of about the way the tide is bringing you one way, but you have to judge it so that if you want to end up there, yeah. So we'd often swim across the river to the railway, and then you have to walk down. You know that? Do you remember that little bridge that goes over? It's still kind of there over the rail. If you wanted to get back to Bilberry, then you'd have to walk back down towards the station and go into the river there and swim across to the tide would bring you over where the roly-polies were, where it is. Yeah. And we'd know the currents and the slipstreams are kind of backwaters, we used to call them. Again, I don't know what the science is this, and I'm sure some of the lads in Cheek Point and who work the river for a living would tell you, but they know all the little eddies and backwaters and all that. But so we'd swim, but mostly we'd go up when we'd make sure that the water was, the tide was high. That was the best time to swim, because you got depth of water as well.
But it's the gas how, like, as kids, you were really aware of the tides in the river. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that was normal.
Well, that was normal, yeah. They call it high water, and part of that was, you know, a ship waiting at lay-by, they call it, waiting down in Dunmore. If a ship arrives in the harbour, there mightn't be a berth in town, but other than that, because of draft, she might have to wait for high water to come up, because the sandbars at Cheek Point and what have you, you know. So the dockers would be saying, oh yes, high water at 3, there'd be something up, you know. And normally, if it came up in the evening, well then the stevedore would contact the dockers and say, look, you're out in the morning, you know, coal boat at number 5 berth or number 2 berth or whatever, or on the Ford Wharf. You know, that, or maybe timber or steel or whatever it was, the cargo was. But sometimes mid-morning, because the high water ship would leave Dunmore maybe an hour before, you know, high water ship had berthed, and the lads might be standing by on the wharf then to start straight away once she berthed. So you get to know, you'd pick up that by osmosis, is that the word? It's in the air around that sort of stuff. And then when you're obviously using the river, then you get to, you know, you can see flotsam going by as well, and you can judge the strength of the tides, and you'd know as well the levels of tides, you know, because you can see not so many, but along the quays there they used to have these markers where they'd be lettering, showing you the height of the water, you know what I mean? So.
And John, I know, like, you've been involved as a socialist all your life here in Waterford, and like Waterford has a long tradition of socialists. You know, even like we say, for example, people going off to fight in other wars and whatnot. Well, I know the Union Hall is not that old. The Connolly Hall is not that old.
I'd say early 60s, because I remember as kids we used to play on the site there, and then this building went up. But they might have, I think they may have had an office on Bridge Street somewhere or other, you know, because as I said, a lot of the CIE workers were always Irish Transport and General Workers Union, and there was a lot of kind of industry at Denny's. And you had the bucket factory, which I should have mentioned as well, up in Grid near DSB depot, and I think there might have been a union office there, but Connolly Hall. But there was a worker study group. They used to read Connolly, Marx, Lenin, and that. They had a little premises that they would discuss stuff and meet regularly. The original premises, they used to do this in Coffee House Lane, where Mrs. Tobin had a cafe. Ma Tobin, Joe's mum, had a famous cafe there, and there was a lovely pub in there now where the Viking hostel is at the moment, called the Punch Bowl. It was our local, because they'd serve you before you ever reached the proper age, and there was dockers and working class people and college boys from Water Park and all that. So it was a great mix, and everyone got on. But the workers kind of discussion group and club, the first one, but they had moved up to Bridge Street for a period of time. So Peter O'Connor and people like that, and the lads that ended up going to Spain, they would have, the history of that is, and we had a premises down in Coffee House Lane as well, up at the, you know where that lock shop is there now, where they're doing that. Yeah, on the corner there's a coffee. There's a coffee house there now. Apparently, it's a great place for coffee. And the history of Coffee House Lane, because that was where the first blending of coffee in Ireland, started there. There was bonded stores as well there, but we were upstairs in you know, there's a little door on that, just if you're sitting out having a coffee, the little door up there, 114 the key, and there was always union offices there, but we had another place, you know, Connell Street. And there was a place, I mentioned the Central Hotel earlier on. In the 60s, there was a group called the Waterford Socialist Group. and they would have been young glass workers and others, and people like Jimmy Crowe, Moses, and that would have been involved with that. Maureen Sneyd, Better Heaven Tour, and Anne Sneyd, and people like that. And they were in the Waterford Socialist movement, and I think they might have been in the Labour Party for a while, because in those days, in the 60s, the late 60s, Brendan Corish used to say the 70s will be socialist. Now, of course, the Labour Party and socialism, genuine, so it's an anathema, in my view, to, and all the history shows it. But Peter O'Connor writes in his memoirs about these discussion groups, and their parents, or their dads and that sort of stuff, and their parents generally, they would have been of a kind of a left-wing persuasion. They were so they would have been involved with the Republican movement during the War of Independence, but in their writings they explained that, look, the United Ireland is all bloody fine and all that, but what kind of United Ireland, And Connolly's writings used to explain that, look, if the Brits go tomorrow morning, and he said this on the way into the GPO, he said, no matter what happens this week, Connolly, hold on to your guns, because if the Brits go, unless there's a profound and fundamental social change, and the country is not running the interests of the great mass of people as opposed to the small elite, you're only exchanging one set of exploiters for another. Tragically, that's what happened. He was so right. But these lads joined a group called, what was it called? The Republican Congress. And they were much more left-wing and wanted real social change. And they argued based on the original ideals of republicanism, Wolfe Tone, the man of no property and all this sort of stuff, and about the people who generate all the wealth in society being run in their interest, and now with, the world is on fire as we speak with this climate change, and the small elites at the top who own them control everything. Short-term profit is their goal. To hell with the planet and humanity. That's the reality of it, So they were involved in that sort of stuff. And then when, of course, you mentioned being involved in wars, in the Spanish Civil War, when that started, the rise of fascism, they've understood full well that, look, depending on the outcome of that, if Franco and the fascism won, it would be horrendous for the history of Europe in the aftermath. So they went to defend the Spanish Republic. Tragically, most of the other states were more fearful of the left in Spain than they were of fascism, and obviously didn't support it, and even Stalin, to a certain extent, ended up doing a deal with sort of, Western powers, sort of, and didn't really. There's an argument, there's a debate about whether, but.
But go back to the lads. They went from Waterford. How many of them went? Would you know?
I think there was 11 or 12 went. Peter O'Connor in his memoir explains that himself and one or two others escaped on a collier, a small coaster that used to bring coal from Wales. They might be 1,500 ton of coal on these things. And this was berthed in the Scotch Quay there, just at the mouth of the Scotch Quay. And they stowed away on it. And the Welsh captain discovered him halfway across the Irish Sea. But he was a decent man, sort of, and he looked after him and kind of fed him, watered him. Then they hitched down to London. And eventually, they got work around London for a while, and then because they were a left wing, they joined the Communist Party in London, and the Communist Party was recruiting for Spain, at the time, but there was around the world, progressive people wanted to go and fight fascism and fight Franco and fight for the elected government which Franco overthrew in Spain, and they were heroic people and putting their lives on the line. Now they were young and maybe as well. I often say to some of our lads, and when we came the generation out, but we were inspired by all them, because some of the survivors we got to know, and they used to come into Jordans and all this sort of stuff, and we'd know them from. So and a number of them. So, and they'd lend you books and different things like that sort of stuff. So Tommy Hogan and all these people, and some of the lads in the class, and Shammy would have known them, better have the Shammy. But that was their story in terms of how they got.
I believe that when they came back to Ireland, a lot of them didn't get great treatment either from.
Yeah, but of course the Catholic Church foul-mouthed them, going for it in one sense. But not only that, the Catholic Church were in support of. Franco was going to put an end to this godless sort of idea of, the left in Spain, where production would be for. Their argument was, look, production should be for human need, not the profit, the spoil. The people who owned everything there were the landed gentry who inherited from, the Spaniards went all over the world, the Spanish in South America and all that sort of. So there's huge wealth built up. When you travel in Spain, by the way, I love, when you travel in Spain now, you can still see elements of the huge wealth, and Spain is a brilliant place, but there's still these true traditions there. But the Catholic Church decided that they were going to be on the side of, the Catholic Church are essentially kind of conservative types and masses of money, and the Vatican and all this. We won't go into all that about the Vatican Bank and all this sort of stuff. But they were just opposed to this godless sort of stuff because their theories were an anathema to, kind of an open, free-thinking society about ordinary people controlling their own life. Because they had huge control in terms of the education system and all that sort of stuff, and even in health. In this country, we know the legacy of all that. We've seen what happened. Think of the Tune babies, think of those Magdalene laundries and all that.
And speaking of which, here we are. This is actually a really interesting piece of time in history for Ireland, because this is the first time where we're not controlled by, say, the Catholic Church, in probably 100 years, really. We say since the British power, left, and the Catholic Church kind of took over a fair bit. And this is the first time that we don't have that influence as such in Ireland. Now I know there's still own property and all that kind of stuff, but we now are in a situation where people can make up their own minds about things for the first time about.
Yeah, look, it's a million times better than it was in that period that we were talking about earlier, the 50s. I grew up in the 50s, sort of, and the level of repression, you could feel it, dark, dank, grey. But they have books banned and everything like that. That was another thing, books banned, and you used to get loads of people going over onto the docks. We had a paper mills here, and ships would come in and put bales of hay, English, and the lads would go over to, and women as well, go over to look for salacious magazines, like Parade. And so the docks were open, but the News of the World might have kind of stuff about indiscretions of vicars and all that sort of stuff, And so this was all banned, and even simple books like Lady Chatterley's Lover was banned. The amount of books that were banned, but the Catholic Church had so much control and that sort of. Thankfully, that's gone relatively, but they still have huge power because they control. Education still quite a lot, even though it's laicized in terms of the people on the boards and all that. And if you look at the hospitals, look at the big debate about, so it was people campaigning. And what emerged out of the 60s were younger people no longer being saying we're going to put up with this sort of stuff. And of course, education allowed people. Education is power. Really, it equips you to have an understanding of what's happening, and then it gives you a kind of a guide to action as well. But, we still have to, there should be no such thing as that. They should have no control over hospitals or education whatsoever. And if people want to educate their kids in religion, that should be done separately from the school and that sort of. But that was done for a reason only, because I'm no expert, by the way, on this. I'm no expert on this or anything like that, but it's what happened essentially was the Brits, the pressure that forced the Brits out eventually, when the land question got resolved, as opposed to the big landowners, the famine period and throwing people off of the land with the big, knocking down poor huts and kind of primitive cottages with a bit of a thatch on them, that sort of stuff, and evicting so that they could use the lands for grazing as opposed to the small holdings that people made a living out of, and provided food, basic sort of stuff. The Land League, when the land question got resolved, the farmers, the people that got the land became the new conservative elite, and they sent the son and daughter to the religious groups to be priests and nuns, so to solidify the conservative view, and that's how. And so the Brits allowed the Maynooth University and all that to train up. That was to train up priests and because it's part of control. It's part of what we call the capitalist superstructure. Which is they control the education system. The rich and wealthy, they develop the curriculum. So therefore, it's limited. You have to find access to different thinking and different arguments and different scenarios that are set out. And when you reach university level, sometimes that can be you have an opportunity to do that. But generally speaking, the ideas in most people's heads are the ideas of the ruling elite, because they have this superstructure and they control the education. They own the media as well, where we get our ideas from. And then they have another repressive apparatus, which is the judiciary and the military. They're, now we're told they're to defend the country and this and that sort of stuff, but they're ultimately, and the reality is they're to defend the class interests of the poor elite. And you can see that during strikes or when there's periods of instability and their power has been challenged. But you don't get taught that in school, and parliaments, bourgeois parliaments, they're fig leaves that hide the true nature of class rule, really. Real power doesn't lie in them at all. It lies in the borders of the big companies. And so we electing people, it's grand, we have to fight for election, but ultimately, when their power is challenged, they can suspend all that sort of stuff and bring it, and you have emergency laws and sort of all this. You see it in different countries. And that's why nothing will really be done about, you heard the climate report yesterday, which was horrendous, but nothing will really be done unless that system is done away with, capitalism in other words.
Just go back to, Jay, I suppose what very interesting about Waterford as well was that a lot of women worked. Denny's, the jute factory, big employers of women.
Yeah.
So women had money. Not all now, but I'm saying quite a lot of women in Waterford would have had money, had an income. And how would you notice that growing up? Would you have seen women having more power than we say,
Yeah, absolutely, Ollie. Yeah, this is what changed things really for women and you see, women. The argument. David's supposed to. I don't know whether he actually said these words, but he want this comely maidens dancing at the crossroads and women barefoot, pregnant, tied to the kitchen sink. We're all slaves under capitalism, but women are the slaves of slaves, really. That's why there's still a fight for equal pay and this sort of stuff. And even though, and we're only different biologically, and that may including physical strength a bit. But you saw Kelly in the boxing, and intellectually and all that. There's no difference. It's just the system. The next generation of workers gets produced on the cheap. If women are subservient to men and they produce, they're rearing children at no cost to the state, relatively no cost. That's why child facilities in this country, for instance, and access to all the basic stuff. In a different world where production was for human need rather than profit, it would be completely different. And way back in eons of time, there was a level of equality, despite the biological differences, you can read it in all literatures and sort of stuff and the old legends and all this sort of stuff. But you're right. When women start going out to work, and this first happened, by the way, during the war, the First World War, in the munitions factory. We had one here. Lots of women were working in the foundry. That was a munitions. They took over the old station on the south side, railway station. And but because of clerical control and all that, when the war ended, you go back to the bloody. But in the 60s here, growing up, and even in the 50s, the second bag, the women had all they began to be able to go out independently in pubs, in groups, sort of, and you had places. Pubs emerged in the late '60s, the Showboat, and even going back before that, I mentioned the Stronghold earlier on, and you had the Maryland and places like that. But for a long time in Ireland, there were, you can still see it in the old pubs, the Snug. Even when women were kind of allowed in, they had to go into this little fucking Snug. I like the little Snugs. I stayed going to the one in Georgia Street, and we used to have them in T&H as well. But that kind of control, and I remember we spoke on earlier before this thing about Tom Mars. I think that was the last pub in Ireland to have this ban on women. But that existed up to relatively recent. So what happened, when women went out to work, they began to realise, look, we have a certain amount of power and the world don't have to be the way we're second-class citizens. So they began to assert that reality and began to fight for their rights. That was where the ideas for women's liberation came. But they came on foot of what I think that happened worldwide, which was after the Second World War, Europe was devastated and all that sort of stuff. There was a long boom, rebuilding, and the Americans, because they didn't want the advance of Stalinism or communism as they, as what was called, but it was the opposite to what genuine what existed in Russia and Eastern Europe was nothing to do after the Stalinists took over. But they didn't want, because they didn't want the advancement of these ideas across Europe, so they put the Marshall Plan. I don't know whether you've ever heard. They put billions into that was to make sure they maintained influence and power. But in America and here in Europe, there was a long period of boom, and people felt that, look, every generation from now on, young people, will have it better than our fathers and our forefathers, and they began to assert themselves, in that way, and that's where, modern kind of music, popular music, the type of stuff now that kind of, gives expression and free will to kind of, so that sort of emerged on foot of people having access to incomes themselves and becoming independent, and women particularly. And then, of course, you had stuff like the civil rights movement. Black people in America began to assert themselves as well, because a lot of them came up from the South, working in factories, car factories and all that sort of stuff, in Chicago and Detroit and all these places. And those sort of factories grew masses of people, and you can feel the collective strength that ordinary people have and your only strength is then by uniting with people, with others, to demand whether there's more wages, better holidays, extended weekend, pension schemes, all that sort. So that gives you, and out of the struggles as well then that people get involved in, because they had to fight, your consciousness can change. You begin to see the structures, like the laws can get used against you, and the role of the police and the way people are treated, and that sort of stuff. And you begin to see the true nature of the way the world is, that superstructure that I spoke about, that's hidden, gets exposed during struggle. So we call it, our consciousness, the ideas in people's heads can change. You see this judge up on a kind of a stand. He's come from a certain type of class background, schools, and passed on. He went to private school, all this sort of stuff, And then you have the media might be foul-mouthed tactics and strategy and kind of development of sort of stuff of campaign groups and activists and all that sort. And why aren't the media supposed to be neutral? Why are they mostly kind of this sort of stuff? So that's ideas changing, and I think women's ideas when they went out to work and felt that and became more independent, start asserting themselves and demand, and that was where, and in recent years it's been brilliant, and I know you were involved a bit in the terms, or you were on the side of, the repeal the 8th and all that. I remember 40 odd years ago, nearly 40 years ago, when they brought in the bloody 8th, we lost the campaign, but we were out day and night, and we used to have dogs being set on us and water thrown, and some of the people I mentioned earlier on who were protesting at Tom Mars about the ban would have been in the vanguard of that. The same. And then the last campaign, was it 2 years ago, was it? You had the marriage equality sort of thing, all that sort of stuff, and about, gay rights and all this sort of stuff. People have asserted themselves more and more. Now, of course...
So there's glimmers of hope, I suppose.
Look, the one constant in human history is change. Everything is always in a state of flux. But that doesn't mean it's always going to be an advance. You can be driven back big time. And now we're on the precipice. If you look at the report yesterday, it's either a different type of world or it's barbarism and end of us as...
I know,
as humanity, really,
Just to go back in history again, though, because this kind of, we just finished this, but
Right.
just the Waterford's association or Waterford's relationship with Britain. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing that people don't talk about very often, is that this was very much a British town historically. Do you know what I mean? It was a garrison town. It was a lot of people from Waterford would have worked in the UK, and money would be coming back. And we had a lot of people in the First World War from Waterford, etc. So maybe just talk a little bit about that. I mean, would you have noticed that growing up, like things like, I don't know, like that, for example, let's say Poppy Day, or would you ever notice any of that kind of stuff when you were growing up?
Yeah, it was fairly standard sort of stuff. Poppy Day, you get people around the centre of town sort of, and they had, I forget the title of it, but they had a kind of a group that kind of supported ex-army veterans and naval veterans, in the pub. And there's no two ways about it that Waterford was a pro-British town, and there's reasons for that. What happened was, we spoke earlier on about the maritime history and tradition. So the invasions, and the British used to come in here, and it became a garrison town. And if the merchant class that built up emerged to look after we spoke about ship chandlery and providing stuff. That's where Denny's factory came out of. Salted bacon, flitches of bacon. They used to, the fridges where, you had to salt the thing and they could last sort of, and Jacob's biscuits. And biscuits would last for months and months for seafarers, Now, they might be reeking with fucking weevils and different things by the time if you're over down in the Gulf of Mexico or somewhere that had been gone away for a few months. But as my poor mother used to say, "Better heaven, you'd eat stones if you're hungry," But a mercantile class developed to look after providing these things. And they eventually, that's when we talk about the blue shirts today. That's the kind of class I'm talking. And all them abattoirs that I spoke about earlier on that existed around the Glen, Ballybricken, and all that. They were all to service the British mainland, both in feedstuffs and cattle and all that, but also provisioning ships here. And the people who organised all that became very wealthy on the basis of it. And their ideas was, look, we should be glad that the Brits are here. We're getting, you have your job.
But even though we were independent at this stage, right, we were still very much connected, weren't we? Right up into the 50s, I'd say, or 60s.
We were, because when we came out of when the Brits went, there was still people were piss poor for a long, long time, and you had to emigrate. There was massive emigration, for instance, in the 50s. To England and all that sort of stuff. I'm working on the railway, which was ever tough in Ireland. People had to emigrate, because we were deliberately kept down. The Brits just wanted this island as a breadbasket, provide cattle, provide wheat and barley and all this sort of stuff. And that's why that's why industry was allowed to develop in Belfast region and shipbuilding and all that sort of, because as a consequence of the plantation, the Protestant plantation and that it survived in that area, that they could trust, and unionism was deliberately developed to divide the working class in the north, so that tuppence halfpenny looking down on tuppence, the poorly could sleep well in their bed. So you had there was always that sort of thing. But what happened was in Waterford, to get back to this mercantile class, by the way, we spoke earlier on about Bridge Street and the area where I'm from. All over O'Connell Street there was big merchant houses. These people that made the money on the basis of the Brits being here, including Jacobs. There in O'Connell Street there was a guest house up there next to George White's. But George White, they were Quakers as well. They weren't necessarily Catholic, they were different. But so you along that street, you had Crokers, bookbinders and all that, printers and all that. You had Harveys. They were all that kind of class of people. You had a whole host of other businesses and that sort of stuff. And they were the people that were benefiting from that economic link and providing the stuff. But also what happens in those scenarios is that a working class, the people who are working for them, even though they keep telling them vote for Redmond and vote for this and that emerging class develops a different class interest and understanding that, look, our interests aren't necessary to say. That was where, like 100 years ago in Waterford, there was a Sinn Féin mayor. People say, oh, Blue Shirt Town, John Redmond and all that used to get elected here and his son and all this sort of stuff. The Blue Shirt were still strong, hence Ballybrickin and all that sort of stuff. And the writing that used to go on and all that sort of stuff. And, there'd be disputes and all that, and the military had come in to shepherd cattle onto ships and all that. You see the old photographs and all that. So there was always, so in other words, class always emerges and the different class interests, and the battle goes on all the time. It's always going on, in fact. Sometimes hidden, sometimes out in the open, sometimes much bigger. Like after the 60s, remember we spoke about the long period of war after the boom. That happened in Europe as well. So do you remember the students in '68? I don't know what age you were. You would have been relatively young, but you would have remembered it easy. And then the civil rights in America and all around. There was an upsurge of struggle here in Ireland as well, and strikes and all that sort of stuff. So that struggle emerges, and sometimes it explodes. You see it in different parts of the world, but. There was that connection, and of course you could go and join the British Army or the British Navy or whatever, and you'd have shoes on your feet and you'd have a uniform and you'd be able to send home money. Or if you're working in factories, like Peter O'Connor, who we spoke about earlier, he was in that left-wing group at the time that went. Peter always stayed true to his left-wing ideas, by the way. He stayed, and all those lads did. They were brilliant. One or two of them were shell-shocked, kind of, the trauma. Shell-shocked is a simple word for it. But they just became kind of more quiet, and I remember one man, I won't mention his name, but because you see people being slaughtered and killed, sort of, and it's bound to have an impact. But so look, the story is that there was always that connection, and that it's less so now, thankfully. It's complete, it's much less so now, and but those ties often exist in you can get it wherever people have to emigrate. You take it from in different parts of South and Central America where there's poverty and all that. So people want to go to where there's perceived to be jobs and some security and rear their family. And the prospect of putting your kids through education to have it better than you, that's always the motive force for these things, And sometimes, and often it can work, but it works. It works for ordinary working people when the economy is booming and that, but the system itself, the crisis is built into it. So it's boom and slump, and now we're living in a period of late capitalism, and there's going to be more and more crisis, and booms will be shorter and shorter. And more people will become impoverished. That allied with bloody climate change. So we're not in a good place, and it's going to be either a profound and fundamental change or barbarism, as I believe anyway. But look, these arguments will emerge over time, and that. But if there's anything else
that's fantastic.
So.
And I think we'll stop there because, I just think that we've covered loads of things.
I know we've jumped all over the place, and
but it's great.
And
it's a lot of really interesting topics there. So, and it's great to get you on film. And
fuck yeah, but look.
Because, in 100 years' time, this will be important, John.
Jesus, stop. But But look, no, look, I often speak to you in pubs and different things, and we have a bit of crack and that sort of stuff. And you, I mean, from the pub, from your own, we didn't get around to,
Some of the locals.
yeah, maybe some other time, but yeah, the local characters and all that. But that area that I'm talking about, I always think it extends over as far as, it goes from Grattan Quay down as far as the clock tower and up a triangle and back up Patrick Street and down the Glen, that locale there. And, the obviously, the cultural quarter there. It's great to see that emerging. That street has huge potential, and there's a couple of secret.
Speaking of which, the PMPA place opposite Downs's, which is now going to be the new, the Road Gallery are moving down there.
Yeah, that's going to be the Road Gallery. Yeah. That's going to be.
Do you know what was that place originally before the PMPA? Was it a garage or something?
There was a garage. You know where the lighting place is? What's the name of the people that have that? Cavagnes, yeah. There was a kind of a garage in there, and there was a garage, next to Johnny the Bromheads now. That's kind of derelict site. That it used to be a kind of interior decoration. Your man Freeman had it. That area was another garage there, from memory. But yeah, that was a garage along there, and that might have been the offices. And in behind that space, that was where that medieval building was, the Thomas a Becket, St. Thomas's Church, and Keneally's, which was another place I didn't mention. Remember I talked about all the industrial kind of developments. Keneally's had a big grain store, and there was a factory there making canvas. I spoke about canvas flitches of bacon that used to wrap the bacon in on O'Connor Street as well, just opposite Bowes.
Oh,
Denny's canvas, yeah, that's right, yeah. And up that Denny's lane, you had Collins's abattoir, and you had a cup down that street. We always called it Denny's Lane. Penrose. Blood and guts there, yeah.
And manure down in that area.
Manure, and then, we didn't even speak about Ballybricken, where the farmers' markets, Can you imagine in the centre of a town? Because it makes sense when you think of abattoir. And we used to look after the cattle there. The farmers would give us, you might get a shilling if they were, after sending down enough beer, you might get 2 shillings or a half crown. But they'd give you what they call an ash plant. Take the ash plant, look after them, you've had to buying stuff, And they'd have them outside Bobby Grace's or wherever. But they'd wash down the slurry then. We'd mind the cattle for a few hours. We were only kids, and then you'd go over and you'd you go over to Robinson's Lane, and when the Looted Orange came out first, you might remember from the pub. You could get that by the glass, they put a little bit of that in, and we thought we were king, you might get a bit of sherbet or some other. Remember them? Yeah, Liam Carr will know all about that, because there was little shops down in Robinson's Lane and around Trinity Square. And we'd think, just we were made up and you might get crisps in Mary Hickey's or Maggie Gallagher's shop. There were a number of huckster shops around the Glen area. There was about 5 or 6 of them in that one triangle. I forgot the Regal Cinema was there as well, of course.
Oh yeah, just tell us about the Regal. You used to go there regularly.
Yeah, the Regal was a kind of a fellow called Billy McBride was the usher. I don't know whether you ever heard or remember him, and that. Yeah, he was the Mrs. Kerr. The Mrs. Kerr in the call. He was the man, a lovely man. But you could go up to the gods there, all wooden benches and all that sort of. And if you could afford it, people used to bring their girlfriends to one of the treatments. That was the last price I remember to get in there. Down below, you had a bit more plusher seats, But there'd be a gang of us. We were all old bowsies, snotty-nosed old bowsies and all that. And you could start banging on the floor if the film was brutal, or if the chap was going to be more needed to escape. You'd hear people breaking. You remember the taffy blocks and halfpenny squares and off at the thing, and you'd have fellas shouting at the film, and then you might throw stuff down if someone might remark, because you could overlook. If you went into one of Trupney places, the best place to stay is back under the thing. You couldn't get, yeah, and we came to Fordham. I remember often chatting with fellas there. There's some great shame it's gone now, but but. That was a great place. People queued up, Ollie, in the 50s, and they used to show our parents used to send us from all around that area and down from Coslow's Lane and Dial Street. They used to show these films there of a Sunday, matinees and all that, and they'd be folly-ups. You ever hear so you might only see half of the bloody, and you'd have to come back next week for the. And there was that, and you got a bit of news as well, because Pate News, and most of these, what do they call it? They have a name on that genre of film where there's, it's black and white, and there's a body on the thing, and the fella has a press thing in his hat and a big camera flashing. What do they call it? Film noir, is that what they call it? I'm not sure what. You know the type of film I'm talking about. Do you remember the Scotland Yard? So we were all exposed to that sort. Of course, then the cowboy and Indian sort of stuff as well, sort of.
Most people didn't have TV.
What? No. Most people didn't have TV, and when TV came in first, you knew the houses of wealthy were known by the big aerial on the roof. You know them big fucking TV. I think he had one on your place in Patterson. Oh yeah, the Savoy. Yeah, I remember the Savoy well. It was that was a great place. The great shame that I know I like the book centre and all that, but Mac, that was part of it. You know the book centre. On one wall there, when you go in, if you're ever upstairs in the cafe, you're looking at the wall where they have that paint coloured. Yeah. That was where the screen was, there, and you were up, and there was kind of was there 3 parts? No, 2 parts there, but that was lovely Art Deco. That should have been kept, and you could have had even a nightclub there now and a restaurant maybe upstairs, because that part of town, that triangle.
But the Savoy was a little bit upmarket to the Regal.
Yeah, the Savoy was a bit more upmarket, yeah. And then of course when the Regina came.
No, but hang on, Savoy also didn't they have a cafe upstairs as well?
Yeah, they had a cafe upstairs, yeah, that's it, yeah. You could, if you were going out for the night and you get people down from Newtown, and they kind of, they were much better dressed than us, and so they might go for some fine dining. Well, I don't know whether it was fine. I never was in the cafe. I was in ones down near it, all right, the Lido and the Odeon. I might have thought the Odeon got exposed because that's your bailiwick as well. But we'd only be up in Little Patrick Street, that little door in there. You know what I mean? Now they had a lovely fire into the main part from Barden Strand Street. You remember that? Yes. It was marble sort of, and all that. A little shop there, and you buy your ticket, and you enter into a kind of. Is it a vestibule? What do they call it? A vestibule, is it? Or like a theatre? Foyer, yeah. And it was lovely. Then you go up these stairs to the cafe, and they were kind of marble sort of stairs. You remember the marble stairs? Yeah. But we always were in the halfpenny place. My poor mother used to say it was, and it was only. Yeah, and you had the queue. Do you remember the queues up there all around? But sometimes we wouldn't have the money, and there was an old furniture factory over in that, and Johnny Herdens, I think, and we go up on the roof, and you go up the pipe into the jacks. So you could end up upstairs.
In the cinema.
Yeah, but the only trouble is they had ushers there, and you had to try and get out when some gentleman or someone was going out, because if the door opened suddenly, the light. See the fucking light. No one went in there. So next minute you come down, you get it hiding off it, because the ushers used to wear kind of a uniform. Do you remember the uniform? Yeah. A fella called Dunphy. Yeah. Now, and so that's what we used to do. Sometimes, but that was great fun there. That's Savoy.
And then when the Savoy closed, then there was a few concerts there in its history as well.
Yeah, I must say I was never at any concert. One of the most famous concerts, I'm glad I wasn't at it, because I wouldn't sleep in the same house as any of the man's music. That Morris.
The Smiths.
The Smiths, that's so, yeah. And I know Bruno and all, I was very fond of Bruno Organ. I helped her. You were, I think, involved as well, maybe. But no, don't give me the Smiths, we won't go there. Yeah. Whatever about, there was one of the guys was a decent guy. What was his name? There was one he had a Mar. Maybe, yeah. But that fucking Morris, and Morrissey turned out to be fascist and fucking mad. No. Yeah. Anyway, we won't go. You were at that gig, right? I'd say. Yeah, you still have the ticket. I'd say. Yeah. But
And sorry, we'll go back. Just one last thing that was about. About the shops around the area. You mentioned, I presume your mother and father, you would have had you would have been on the book in some of the shops.
Yeah, the shops gave tick. There was a shop down. There was 5 or 6 huckster shops, even in Bridge Street. There was the Mordens, Frankie Morden and his mum, Ethan Morden, and them. They had a shop just next to Connolly Hall there, on that corner somewhere there. Across the road there was a little engineering works, Deegan's, and there was a little shop there from down the street was a man called Tom Peters. And that, in behind there is where Londoners had the bakery and where the Jacobs factory, from what I understand, next to the Dominican there. And then you had Murphy's. Oh, you had, what was it? The Green Bank. Remember the great confection? You had Murphy's and Sinnett's. And across the road, which was all that block, was Breen's, the Bridge Hotel. They had a kind of a general store there where you get groceries, and they also had a meat department, and over the street as well. So a lot of those places, not the last one I mentioned, but Tom Peters and Maggie Gallagher, Brady Hickey on Ballybricken, 2 shops on the top of the hill there, on the brow of the hill, just at Francis Street. And that corner that's had been taken out of it there was Brady Hickey had a shop, and she had a little penny library attached to it. I used to have to go up and get books. My mother was a woman called Netta Muscat, etched into my head. She liked to read her stuff. Netta Muscat was, I think, they were just ordinary books, but Mary Hickey had this little, these penny library. You'd hear him. Some of the huckster shops on Barrack Street and on the Mall had them as well. But then there was...
You paid?
Yeah, you gave a penny and you got a book out and you brought it back. It was stamped on it and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was...
So it was a private book library?
Yeah, private book library. Penny libraries they used to call them, yeah. And then down the street you had a woman called Kathleen Brennan at the top of Thomas Street there, opposite where the old ground is now. Up Hanley's pub, it used to be in those days. Kathleen Brennan had a shop. Then you had Shorters over on the other side. And you had Barden's and Tommy Griffin's. Can you imagine? So all these huckster shops, and they done a book and account, you'd write it down so you go up and pay them at the end of the week when you get the thing. Now there was a shop, the Kervicks, the vegetable people, when they were all young fellas, they set up a shop. It was known as the Teddy Boys. They used to dress, the Teddy Boy thing came out that time with the denims and the fold up here, and then there was stringy, do you remember them string tie thing with a kind of a diamond shape? And the way they had their hair done, But they opened the first vegetable shop, the Kervicks and Joey Kervick and his brothers. But they had an old clock that wasn't working. It had a big sign on no tick. You had to pay up front because,
No tick on the clock?
Yeah, they had a sign, because that was what it's called. You do tick, in other words.
And was that a big statement to say you didn't get credit?
Well, I don't know for what reason it would have been at the time, but it became a kind of it was almost a cost to level. It adds a no tick. You have to, if you want to go in and buy some carrots or turnips or cabbage or whatever, that's what they used to do, and they were obviously entrepreneurial types, and that sort of stuff. And they developed then onto the hill on Ballybricken, and I still know some of the young fellas, the lads would be setting the Christmas trees there, and the lad that works in, they're nice people, and they had the pub as well then later on and all that sort of stuff. And one of them used, remember through the arts thing, they used to do stuff on Ballybricken that say, I forget the man, what's the man's name?
Freddie.
Of course, Freddie, yeah, sure, geez, Freddie is as famous as the man in Tremor, what's his name? Rocky Mills, yeah. In Waterford City, he's kind of anyway. Look, it was a wonderful place, and O'Connor Street, as I said, was all that class of people that they moved out, by the way, when that working class emerged, that had different classes and got rowdy. They called, the Great Unwash got a bit too noisy. They moved out to the countryside, the Manor St. John and all that sort of stuff, and they went out to Kilmeaden and down towards Patton and built houses. That's why they went out, and a lot of them became kind of slummish. And of course the council destroyed the lovely, the roof line and the legibility of the street with the planning sort of and all that. There was no such thing as forward thinking. And if you look at, where that casino is now, if you look at the way there's a casino with red brick, that was an ESB place, do you remember? But look, the potential of that street, that's how we got onto that one. The potential of that street. What?
Has great potential.
Yeah, and I would say all the way over as far as the Dominican Church and the back of the Bridge Hotel first nightclub in Waterford started there, Saks. You remember Saks nightclub? And then Xanadu, yeah. But the Metropole then developed into the Metro. But instead of parking buses there at the back of the Breach Hotel, which they do when before this pandemic, I think that most of that street, or the whole lot of it, should be pedestrianised and open it up. And do you know where that youth training place now? That could be a youth hostel there, maybe with a thing on the ground floor. And there's other areas that could be developed. And there's two courtyard areas. They're hidden parts of Waterford. O'Connell Court. Do you know where O'Connell Court is?
Yes.
Yeah, do you know next to Delaney's is an archway. Did you ever walk in around there? Yeah. Now there's flats and stuff in there, but that could be paved properly. You'd see them in different. Yeah, and you might and there's a little. There's another one. There's a restaurant next to it. The restaurant could have a few tables up there, and you might have a little water feature in there, or someone could have a little wine bar. And on that street, you'd see it. I love going to old cities, and even London, in different parts of London that you'd explore, and places, Madrid or any of these places. You see these little coins, you go in, a vista opens up, and there's all this stuff inside, and there's little kind of things going on in there as part of the general thing. And there's another one down from that archway.
Yes.
Yeah. Now there's old derelict garages there, and I reckon we have submissions gone in to
and
this.
you can see them from the car park up in Thomas Street. If you walk onto the car park, you can look down on them.
Oh, can you there? Yeah. Well, that car park on Thomas Street, I mentioned that earlier. That was where that Thomas's church was, which was a shame to knock. They could have, if they had any foresight, imagination, you know the story. But look, that other place, they want to build on what they call brownfield sites. That dereliction in that second one, they should be inner city apartments for mixed type, and single people there. And that Munster Express old building that they used to store, that could be, and you see the red brick there. You take off all that old cladding and you could restore that, and you could have maybe up that little street. Look, the potential is there for, yeah.
We might see it in our lifetime, but it happened.
No, but we're calling for all that development, as well as the linear park along the quay, to take away that steel barrier between citizens and the river.
Car parks on the quays.
Yeah, and so linear walk on that quay would be brilliant. Listen, guys, I'm sorry, it's 2:00.